Give us some background about this case. We understand that Mr. Scott Kimble was the ex-police chief of McFarland, now in Arvin. But how did this investigation come about?
How it got started was that someone from the city government in McFarland came to us, and they told us about this investigation, and we were able to get the records. And what it showed was that in 2016, the city of McFarland did do an investigation regarding these allegations. They presented the result of this investigation. They hired an outside investigator who presented the findings to the city manager, Mr. Wooner, in McFarland, and he looked at that and withheld some of these findings from other city council members and chose not to do anything about it regarding discipline or termination or anything. We were able to get this information. In 2019, we did our own investigation using some of the initial investigation. We did our own investigation, and we felt it warranted a criminal charge after a lot of investigation that we did.
Obviously, the question is, we all know what happened with Mr. Wooner later on, found dead in the Kern River. How does this relate to the death of Mr. Wooner, if in any way, shape, or form?
I don't know. Is there a connection between, the timing, of course, is something, but I don't believe, and I'm not familiar with any police report or any type of allegation that Mr. Wooner's death is related to Mr. Kimble leaving McFarland and going to Arvin. I also wanted to tell you that this information was not disclosed to Arvin when Arvin was doing Mr. Kimble's background. So they did not know about this investigation when an offer was made and he was hired to be Arvin's police chief.
As we know, Officer Keegan, who I believe was the officer that was involved, he filed a lawsuit later on, and that lawsuit was settled with the city of McFarland for $65,000. That was public record. So that happened after Mr. Wooner kept everything hushed up?
Well, I don't know exactly the timing of the lawsuit and when the lawsuit was filed in relation to this. The dates are pretty specific on when the conduct happened in this case, and that was in 2016. That basically these officers were bullied, and that Chief Kimble then abused the public trust in making them do work for him.
By filing it as a misdemeanor, Mr. Kimble can theoretically keep his job in Arvin, even though he's agreed to resign. But he can still work as a police officer, can't he?
He can still work as a police officer, but it was part of this plea bargain that he offer his resignation to Arvin. But now he will be on what we call a Brady list. This was a crime involving moral turpitude, and that was important to us, to get a crime in which he admitted moral turpitude or dishonesty. So he will be on what we call a Brady list that will now follow him for the rest of his career. And I don't know, it would be very, very doubtful that any peace officer or law enforcement agency, rather, would hire him. And one of the reasons we file this as a misdemeanor is with the amount of loss. As you know, misdemeanor, the difference between felony and misdemeanor, the amount of loss these days because of Prop 47 is $950, and these are specific incidents, and none of them rise to a level over $950.
But doesn't the total rise over $950?
No, you have to look at each count individually.
Really?
When you're looking at that, yeah.
So you cannot consider the total?
Consolidate them, no, because they're different victims, and well, it's one of the factors that we looked at, the total amount of restitution. But it wasn't all that much. But regardless, even though it wasn't a lot of restitution, and he has agreed to pay that back to McFarland, it was the principle for us.
How do you personally feel about something like this? Not only was he a police officer, but the chief of police in McFarland, and then being hired as chief of police in Arvin, the fact that you guys found what you found?
Well, I think it's intolerable, and that's one of the reasons that we filed these charges. It's intolerable that a chief of police would bully officers, get them to do personal work for him on government time. It's unacceptable, and it's one of the reasons that we filed these charges and demanded his resignation as chief from Arvin.
What kind of a sentence are you asking for later on in March?
Well, we're asking for what we laid out today in court on the record, and that is that he resign as Chief of Police of Arvin, that he pay back the restitution, that he be on probation for 3 years.
Were these officers told that they would be fired if they didn't follow through and do the work? How was it phrased?
I don't think they were told they would be fired if they didn't do the work, but they certainly felt intimidated into doing the work. They were bullied.
Reminded that they were at will.
Yes, reminded that they were at-will employees, all that type of behavior, in which they really wanted to keep their jobs.
And it was 2 officers, correct?
It was 2 officers, and they were sent to Southern California near his house there to do training, but yet went over and worked on his house to get it in better shape so he could make a profit. And then when he moved to Kern County, they were sent from McFarland to unload his moving van on city time.
Cindy, should officers be held to a higher standard, and jail time shouldn't be sought in this case?
Well, evidently we didn't think so, or we would have asked for that. But jail time, I'm not sure that was necessarily appropriate. The most important thing for me was that he no longer can be the Chief of Police in Arvin.